Okay, can y'all see the slideshow?
hmm
All right. Well, I'm excited about our first webinar version of Wicked Problems. We've had a few hiccups, but hopefully we'll figure these out as we move forward. Um, so tonight we're talking about housing insecurity. I'll start off by talking a little bit about the concept of wicked problems, what we're trying to do. But mainly this is about GSU faculty talking about this issue from different uh, disciplinary perspectives. Tonight we have Taylor Shelton from geography, Melody Kelley from chemistry, Maurice Hobson from Africana Studies, and Jacob Hackett from education. So just a couple of minutes on what are wicked problems. Essentially, these are real world issues that are complex and have no clear, easy solutions. So it's not something that we can sometimes even begin to understand through one discipline or much less find a solution to. And often when we talk about solutions to wicked problems, these are things that we have to redo over and over and over because wicked problems change just inherently because they're connected to human beings, society, and they are huge issues. Um, and what we're hoping to do is bring together faculty to discuss these issues from different disciplinary vantages, and then allow students to think about these issues, not in a way that says, here's what I can remember about housing from a chemistry perspective or an education perspective, but actually truly try to wrap their heads around these issues, understanding that they're not going to fully understand the problem and not going to be able to come up with the right answer or solution necessarily to these things. We'll go ahead and get started. I think we've got Taylor up first with geography.
Sure. Thanks, Brennan. Brennan, do you want to, what about doing, can you see me if I like do a hand signal for you to switch?
I can.
Okay, sure. I'll give you a thumbs up every time I'm ready for you to switch the slide then.
Got it.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Brennan, and thanks folks for being here. As Brennan said, my name is Taylor Shelton, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Geosciences here at Georgia State. But I am a geographer here at Georgia State. Geosciences is home to a few different disciplines, but I specifically bring the approach of a geographer to the table here when we're talking about housing. So in my opening remarks here to get us started off, I want to talk about what geography has to say about housing as a wicked problem, which may not be immediately obvious to all of you, especially if you have never taken a geography course before, or if your only real direct experience with geography might have been in middle or high school or something like that, where the focus is really on memorizing countries and capitals and their locations and names and all of that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, geography is about where. But it isn't about where just for the sake of where. We don't want to just know where things are and have that be the end of the story. But instead, where can tell us a lot about why things happen and who is most affected by them. And so this is especially true when it comes to issues of housing inequality, which, like so many other issues, are what we call spatially uneven. That means, in a really general sense, that that thing doesn't occur in all places, but even in those places where it does occur, it might be experienced to much different degrees or with different kinds of characteristics. Essentially, the same things don't happen equally in all places. But understanding where those places are and understanding what those places might have in common or where they might be different helps us to understand the driving causes behind those processes. And this is especially true of issues like housing instability and inequality. So in my research, I have worked on a number of different manifestations of housing inequality in places like Louisville and Lexington, Kentucky, where I'm from, and Starkville, Mississippi, where I lived previously to moving here to Atlanta. But my recent work has really been focused here in Atlanta on one specific iteration of these processes, the massive growth in single family rental properties owned by Wall Street investment firms. So I want to talk just a little bit about this as kind of a specific introduction to some of the broader issues and how geography approaches them. So in the last decade, these Wall Street firms have gone from not even existing to owning somewhere around 400,000 single family homes across the country. The issues with this have been documented really extensively by journalists and academics alike, from the fact that these landlords are much more likely to raise their rents quite rapidly, to neglect maintenance requests from tenants, or to serial file eviction notices at the first moment that a tenant happens to be late on their rent. And all of those things are important because those are things that we know are both manifestations of, but also then lead to further housing instability and inequality. But again, these things don't happen everywhere. So here you can see a map. This is one that I didn't make, but we'll get to a couple that I did here in a moment, which shows the geography of these investments in single family rental homes across the country at the scale of metropolitan areas, essentially large cities, along with their surrounding suburbs being clustered together. And surely one thing pops out at you looking at this map, and that is that Atlanta is the center for these kinds of investors buying up single family homes across the entire country and by a long shot. But you also might notice that as much as Atlanta and a handful of other places, places like Phoenix or Tampa, show up pretty prominently on the map, there are also entire swaths of the country that don't show up on the map at all, that essentially have no activity by these investors happening in those places. So again, spatially uneven. That doesn't mean that housing instability or inequality doesn't exist in those places, but it does mean that something different is going on in those places than, for instance, what's happening here in Atlanta. And one of the things that unites all of the places that we do see these companies buying up large numbers of homes is that these first are growing metropolitan areas. They're places with lots of jobs and lots of demand for housing. People are moving to them, people want to live there, and so on. But we know that that's also true of a lot of other places that, again, don't show up on the map. So what else is going on that makes these places different? What is it that's driving the particular kind of investment in these properties rather than others? And with very few exceptions, that thing is that these are all places where the law is heavily tilted in favor of landlords. Very few protections exist for renters in the places where these companies are investing, whether that be in the form of rent control laws or eviction protections like those that happened in a number of places during the pandemic. So in other words, these are the places where it's the most profitable to be a landlord because the potential costs are fairly minimized and the potential rewards are quite high. And those rewards are even higher when these firms start owning enough property that they can begin to really capture and set the terms of the housing market, whether that's at the scale of a city itself or even within a given neighborhood within the city. And so scale is another really important dimension that geographers focus on because spatial scale helps shape the way that we experience, define, and measure issues like housing instability. And so while looking at the scale of these metro areas across the US can tell us one thing, that's not the entire story, right? We have to zoom in and look at things at a finer grained resolution in order to understand the real picture. And so here we can zoom in to the 5 core counties of Metro Atlanta, where just the 10 biggest firms of this type buying up single family rental homes own over 32,000 single family homes, a number that's more than double if you add some of the further outlying counties in the Atlanta metro area. But again, at the metro scale here, you can see that these patterns of where these properties exist are spatially uneven. Some places have a whole lot, and some places have basically none at all. So some people are going to be much more likely to have these kinds of companies and investors affecting their everyday life, whether it's directly being their landlord or indirectly shaping the neighborhood that they live in. And other people are going to barely know that they exist, right? Other people are going to be very much divorced from the reality of what these companies are doing and what impacts they're having on people's ability to live in safe and healthy and happy homes. Um, and so I'm going to leave it there for the time being. And we'll hopefully have a chance maybe when Brennan asks us some questions to come back to a couple of other maps I have tacked on here at the end. But suffice it to say that the takeaway point here is really that the question of where, again, is incredibly important to understanding the who and the why of the problem of housing instability, as well as maybe a little bit the question of how this housing instability actually takes place and how it occurs and how it's reproduced and so on. But I will leave it there and pass it on to the next panelist.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. And I think we've got Melody from chemistry up next.
Yes, thank you, Taylor. A lot of that actually, weirdly enough, correlates to some of the things I'm going to be talking about. But I guess that's what this whole initiative is about. So, hi everyone. I'm Melody Kelley. I'm an associate professor in chemistry at the Dunwoody campus predominantly, and I also work in CETLO. I'll be looking at housing affordability today through a chemistry lens, or better yet, a chemical education lens. I'm not going to lead with how chemistry fits. I'm going to build up to it. So I need you to bear with me. I want to leave you in suspense for a little while. A little bit of a personal story. I I'm trained in organic chemistry, so that's the aspect that I'll be bringing in. But when I moved to Georgia State, when I moved to the Atlanta area to take a position at Georgia State about 7 years ago, I moved into an apartment in Sandy Springs, Georgia, and um, I immediately it became immediately clear to me that there was a need for advocacy and understanding, or let me put it this way, there was a lack of representation of the experience of people who live in multifamily housing stock as it relates to policymaking. That became pretty obvious. And so as a result, I became a little bit of an activist, a tenant organizer, and I worked with Housing Justice League for a while. And ultimately, I ran for office locally on on the um, on the premise that I wanted to advocate for our multifamily communities. So the opportunity to do this project where essentially I could create some synergy between my professional, what I'm doing professionally, and kind of my activities on the side was one that I jumped at. And so I just want to give you that so you can understand a little bit of where I'm coming from. You can stroll. Okay. So one of the things I know is that in terms of housing, Atlanta, or let's talk about economic development, Atlanta in some ways is a victim of its own success. And what I mean by that is that the bottom line is that there is a considerable amount of growth that this region is going to need to prepare to accommodate as a result. I mean, well, in order to stay economically viable. And to do that affordably, multifamily housing stock or apartments, if you will, is going to have to play a pretty significant part in new construction. Um, so it's interesting how Taylor, that was some really great data on the prevalence of these corporate this corporate purchasing of single family homes, I believe one of the reasons Atlanta is so attractive is because what we see right here on the left, in the upper left, which is that Atlanta relative to other cities is pretty low density. And so as a result, what you see, and now I'm shifting to the image that I pulled from the City of Atlanta's planning website, that essentially the highest growing type of new stock, new product is 50 plus units. So apartments, high rises, multifamily housing stock. So we're definitely starting to see a lot of it. So that's where I'm going to focus my interests and my discussion today. Next slide, please. This probably goes without saying, but most of Atlanta rents their home. That's the data. Where if you look at it statewide, you're around 65% owner occupied housing. Atlanta is below 50, around 45. So most of Atlanta housing is occupied by renters. And of course, apartments are going to be the predominant form of rental stock. Even though we are starting to see, to your point, Taylor, a lot of single family getting purchased and turned into rental stock as well. But the thing is, and you can stroll for me, density does not necessarily equal affordability. So recent data shows that nearly 50% of renters, which make up a majority, spend over 30% of their income on rent. Again, something that goes almost without saying. So the path forward in terms of affordability and multifamily housing stock is going to depend on the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing stock. In other words, older apartments. And that's where I want to focus. And that's where I think the chemistry can come in. And you can scroll to the next slide. So when we're talking about preserving older apartments or even building new apartments that can stand the test of time so that they can become naturally occurring affordable housing, there's a lot of places where chemists can fit in. You could talk about materials, you could talk about mold, you actually could probably talk about water quality. Where I am going to focus as an organic chemist is on indoor air quality, and specifically a category of contaminants known as volatile organic chemicals, and even more specifically than that, pesticides. Why pesticides? Well, because oftentimes when you rent, you do not have control over the type of pesticide. You actually not even control. There's no transparency around it. You have very little control over the transparency or the type of chemicals that are used in treating apartments for insects. So pesticides is an area that could definitely use some further study from an organic chemist. If you look at the EPA's website, and they do have a website on pesticides, and you can stroll for me. It's very interesting because they list out, the EPA definitely provides a list of all the health effects. So exposure to certain types of pesticides can lead to issues with nervous system and respiratory issues, just like a lot of other pollutants. But also what it says on the EPA website is there are no guidelines or regulations as it relates to air quality in this particular category of chemicals. Considering the fact that in modern society, and I found studies that say this, over 90% of our time is spent indoors, I think, and what I would submit as a chemist is that we need to be a little more thoughtful around indoor air quality and the chemicals that are being used indoors and how they linger and build up and how they can impact health outcomes, particularly in multifamily housing. And you can go to the next slide. In multifamily housing, and I'll show. Oh, right. So pesticides are organic compounds, period. Now, these 5 compounds were the subject of a study that was done and focused on Boston, Massachusetts. It was done by scholars from Harvard, Stanford, and I think Boston University. They all teamed up to study the prevalence of these 5 compounds in multifamily housing. And what they found was not only was there considerable amount present in dust on the surface and in the air. The cyfluthrin, the one on in the upper left corner, was actually disproportionately present in homes with Hispanic families. And that's very interesting because this is actually a restricted use compound. So nobody should ever be spraying this in their homes at all. It's for use outdoors. It has agricultural uses. So this is just an example of a study. When we talk about organic chemistry courses, any of these compounds, the chemistry related to them, the synthesis, their properties, they are fair game for any sophomore level organic chemistry course. And so you can scroll to the next slide, my final slide. And so there's quite a few ways that the looking at the exposure of indoor pesticides can be incorporated into sophomore level organic chemistry courses. In more applied settings like laboratories and undergraduate research courses, direct sampling and analysis can be used. In fact, the method of analyzing air samples is actually a method that's introduced in the sophomore lab. And to the extent that there is indoor air quality data available, which there isn't a lot for Metro Atlanta, it could be analyzed as well and mapped, bringing in geography again. So from a purely theoretical standpoint, and this is something I plan to incorporate next semester when I teach organic chemistry too, is we're going to explore the neurotoxicity and some of the decontamination chemistry of some of the more prevalent pesticides. And as a service learning project, students can also design and implement outreach campaigns to stakeholders like the Georgia Apartment Association, local policymakers, and housing advocacy groups. Thank you.
All
That's all I
right.
have. Yep.
Thanks, Melody.
Mhm.
All right, and I think we've got Maurice up next.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is not 6 o'clock yet, so it's afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you all. First and foremost, I'm thankful to Brennan Collins for inviting me to participate in this, and for Taylor Shelton and Melody Kelley. Very intriguing presentations. I grew up in a science household. I have a brother that's a chemist, and so there's a lot that I can think about when we start talking about all of this. I am an associate professor of Africana Studies and historian at Georgia State University. And the question has often been asked, and Brennan, when I give you a thumbs up, you can move on to the next slide. The question is you know, when it is asked, what does your discipline ask about the issue of housing? I want to kind of give you all a backdrop and overview. Much of my own, my initial research started with with a history of the city of Atlanta, Georgia, in my first book titled "The Legend of the Black Mecca: Politics and Class in the Making of Modern Atlanta." And one of the cool things about the book is, while I was writing it to get tenure and to do and to move things along as I needed to do, the book won all of these awards in terms of health determinants and health disparities and all kinds of different things. And housing was one of the areas in which, became a major issue. And so Africana studies as a discipline applies interdisciplinary knowledge as well as specific approaches that call into question policies that promote discrimination. We have to think about things in this particular way. As an Africana studies scholar and historian who has written significantly on the city of Atlanta and how it interacts with the rest of the Black world, one cannot help but consider issues around low income, no income residents, and affordable housing. And how would urban renewal, I want you to think about these theoretical frameworks I'm about to throw out there: urban renewal, gentrification, neoliberalism, urban regime theory, political economy, and within Black communities, urban uplift theory, how they are weaponized to displace, demonize, criminalize, and disenfranchise Black people. Africana studies scholars sees this trend in every aspect of Black life and throughout Black communities in the Western Hemisphere. One of the things I'll often do when I present in public is I talk about how isms, the discriminatory practice isms, equals prejudice plus the use and the abuse of power. Power creates policies and policies create law. In 1968, just after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Atlanta's most beloved son, was assassinated, one of the things we see is the Fair Housing Act. And the interesting thing about it is, as the world celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, by the way, when he was assassinated, was one of the most hated men in the United States, this has become the political economy of Atlanta in terms of tourism, as Atlanta likes to situate itself as the cradle of the civil rights movement. But we're gonna have a really honest and sobering conversation about this as we move forward. In terms of what solutions does your discipline offer, one of the things I want us to consider is that Africana Studies has created research agendas and solutions that tackle vectors of racism, structural racism in our society, that critically examine the uplift political, cultural, and economic solutions with viable potential in terms of to advise justice, connect with agents of democracy, grassroots leaders, policymakers, justice advocates as collaborators of justice-oriented transformation. I want to kind of bring this to you all in particular ways is because I identify as a social scientist. While I do have a PhD in history, I am also trained in the methodology of political science, sociology, and economics. And part of the reason I consider myself to be in this particular stead is when you study marginalized communities, and in my case, when you study African descended people, particularly in the United States and in the American South, oftentimes the data sets that are used are not in a normal archive. And so you have to be able to use different methodologies and extrapolate particular ideas. GIS mapping, as Dr. Shelton put before us before, promotes this particular notion. In terms of how this works, and I've just really made this statement, for those who study race, class, gender, and sexuality and other social constructs that marginalize and discriminate against populations, it is necessary for you to be trained in different interdisciplinary methods. I'm going to give you all a very quick case in point. I grew up in the state of Alabama, and several years ago, the state of Alabama passed a law that discriminated specifically against brown people, against migrant workers. Now, while that state law was passed probably in 2010, and now that there's been some time since 2010, as a historian, the rule of thumb is that something has to be 20 years old or 25 years old for you to really see the impact on what happens with it. But sometimes marginalized communities don't have that kind of time. And so you have to use different skill sets to be able to understand or articulate the issues that took place. When the state of Alabama passed that law, what we saw is an increase in brown people showing up in neighboring states, whether it be Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, or Florida. We see birth rates that rise. We see a browning of public school systems. We begin to see all of these different things. That may not be historical, but it tells the story and what we're doing here. However, the thing about this is that most of the time when we talk about marginalized communities, the ways in which you understand them, you have to, as W.E.B. Du Bois would say, you have to be able to see beyond the veil. Meaning oftentimes it's not necessarily clear to the American mainstream, i.e. white America, what you're actually seeing. And so to give you all a case in point on what I mean by this, the example that I'm going to use to demonstrate the issue around housing in a city like Atlanta is what as a theoretical framework that I created in my original research called the Olympification of cities. What the Olympification of cities does, and it can be used for Olympic Games, World Cups, Pan American Games, Super Bowl, is it demonstrates how a particular area is franchised for world consumption and who are the winners and losers after this particular area is franchised for world consumption. So on September 18th, 1990, just 95 years shy of Booker T. Washington giving his speech that was deemed as the Atlanta Compromise that promoted segregation that would later play out as Plessy versus Ferguson and segregation. Atlanta is named the host of the Centennial Olympic Games. And once this, but the seeds of this really start in 1987 when a former Georgia Bulldog and attorney by the name of Billy Payne approaches then mayor and former UN ambassador Andrew Young and says, I believe Atlanta can host the Olympic Games. And what happens with this is Andrew Young as mayor helps to create the Georgia Amateur Athletic Foundation. And what happens from this is this sets Atlanta up to become a city that can host amateur games, which was a prerequisite for any city hosting the Olympics. What happens with this, though, is when Atlanta wins the bid for the Olympic Games, the white business elite draw an invisible circle around the city. It is called and they build this this office space called the Atlantic Center, and the notion of it was to attract downtown businesses back to downtown after white flight. The major players in this were Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, Bell South, and SunTrust Bank. But when the white business elite drew this invisible circle around the city, what they were doing is they were targeting to take back all of the downtown real estate. Also during this time, the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau and the University System of Georgia put about $160 million into creating the Olympic Village. And what happens with this is many housing activists believe that after the games that this $160 million investment will be given to low income and no income people. You also have the creation of the Atlanta Project, where President Jimmy Carter was putting forth this idea that would nullify poverty in downtown Atlanta, but it didn't necessarily work that way. What happens, though, is this is what takes place. The Olympics were actually used as an opportunity to take back all of the downtown real estate in particular ways. And how Black Atlantans saw this is that the motives of the white business elite created or dictated Black political power, creating Black puppet governments. So there was serious distrust with people on the ground, low income, no income people on the ground, and City Hall. And the thing about it is this, and I need you all to hear me when I say this. The Olympics displaced 70,000 Black people, 22,000 families, moved them down to Clayton County and parts of DeKalb County. And between 1974 and 1984, public housing was cut in Atlanta by 75%. So what we began to see is this attack on low income, no income Black folk. And so when we move on through this, of course, this impacts all aspects of crime. With the arrival of crack cocaine, this impacts all aspects of particular crime. Atlanta is the most violent city in the United States in 1990. We see 16,097 crimes that takes place. And so as a result of this, for the last slide, as I kind of leave out of here, the question is how does my research or my teaching address this issue? Well, in the fall of 2019, one of the things that I always have to do, and I want to put this out there, is that Georgia State University is a think tank that sits very close to Atlanta City Hall and sits very close to the state capitol. We should be considered a think tank. And so one of the things I've tried to do with my courses is back in the fall of 2019, I began to really promote my classes to begin to work with local and state administrations to ensure that our governments are inclusive and sensitive to the needs of Black communities. My History of African Americans in Georgia class has partnered with the Georgia Black Legislative Caucus, as well as various other municipalities in the Atlanta metro area to tackle multiple issues surrounding housing, Black voter suppression, criminal reform, voting, Black women and reproductive health, the gender wage disparity. And this is only naming a few of the discriminatory policies that we've been able to see. So in short, Africana studies marries the notion of what the experiences of Black people are with other particular disciplines to use these particular kind of methodologies to be able to give a full-scale product as to what will allow for Black communities to sustain themselves in the best capacity. So thank you all for my time. I yield back my time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Maurice. And last but not least, we've got Jacob.
Hi, y'all. I have just really enjoyed everyone on the panel. I'm so appreciative of being asked to and invited to be a part of this project, the in-person session, and then now the virtual session. It's just been great. And I hope we can get this to continue because Wicked Problems is a very powerful way of framing the ways that we all intersect with each other in really powerful ways. I really love our geographers, our sociologists, our Africana studies historians, and our chemists, because that really infuses a lot of what I do in education. So what I'm going to take a look at is this intersection between housing and education. So I'm over in the middle and secondary department, and I prepare teachers through here at Georgia State's downtown campus. I prepare middle school teachers. So I take a very ecological approach to the ways that we develop teachers. Historically, there's been a very big focus on preparing teachers' instructional practices in the classroom. And there's a few of us that say those instructional practices are really important, but what's also really important is to understand beyond the classroom walls, to understand the whole child and the whole family, and see how that whole child and how that whole family brings their whole experience to the classroom. And so I see a lot of through lines between what the other panelists have already been talking about and how we prepare teachers. So one thing that Dr. Hobson just mentioned is lifting the veil, so to speak. And we just call that, it's the same thing, but we call that the hidden curriculum. So we call the hidden curriculum is what is also happening within a classroom, within a school, and within a community that is beyond just simply the textbooks that we're using within the classrooms. And and then one of the other things that I'll reveal at the very end is how I think our discipline can help out with this wicked problem, which is developing a community asset map, which is something that we borrow from our geographers. And then how we also understand the idea of place. So go ahead, Brennan, sorry about that. So a critical pedagogy of place challenges all educators to reflect on the relationship between the kind of education they pursue and the kind of places we inhabit and leave behind for future generations. So I really want to use this quote to lift up this idea of place-based education. So again, it's beyond the classroom walls and understanding the whole community and the whole environment where our children and our families come from if we want to work in solidarity with them, which I hope most of our educators want to do. So I borrow from two amazing scholars to be able to inform our work here. And the first one is Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Go ahead, Brennan. Who is a former AER. You can hit it a couple times. I think there's an animation. Sorry about that. So there's her wonderful face. And she allows us to shift from this idea of really focusing on the skill development of our kiddos, which is something called the achievement gap. I'm sure people are pretty familiar with the achievement gap. It's a very popularized term that's been around for about 20 to 30 years that really has its roots in Reagan's A Nation at Risk report, and then goes right into No Child Left Behind, which is unfortunately blaming a lot of children for the circumstances in which they come from and saying they really need to just work harder, or we need to work stronger and harder for them to lift themselves up and close that achievement gap, which is both race-based, economic-based, and disability-based. And Gloria Ladson-Billings says, no, let's shift from just looking at the achievement gap, but actually looking at the educational debt that is really owed to a lot of our children who come from impoverished communities, to say, you know what, we have exploited those communities for many generations, and we haven't even properly provided them with the resources that they would need. And so it's really detrimental to just say that is an achievement gap type of problem, and only look at their standardized test scores as what's really going on in this environment. So if we use her footing and her guidance and then also incorporate, go ahead, Brennan, the next one, Yuri Bronfenbrenner, which says, let's look at the development of a child, one more, sorry, and not just have an individualized child, which is in the beginning of that, in the middle of those concentric circles, but also look at the various systems that impact the development of that child, whether there's microsystems, mesosystems, and exosystems and macrosystems. That's what really allows us to understand the individual development of that child if we incorporate more of the system level analysis. So we rely on those two greatly in our program here at GSU. Go ahead with the next one. So another thing that taking this ecological approach allows us to do is to, one, develop ecologically minded teachers. It also exposes this big partnership that Taylor was just talking about between privatization of education, which he was talking more about the privatization, right, of corporate single property owners and in the Atlanta areas. And I'm going to show a deep connection between the privatization of education and community development and what we're seeing, which is a cityhood movement, as well as, so like within school districts, micro school districts developing, as well as property developers partnering with charter schools and private schools to develop these school and housing partnerships. So here's just one spotlight. And of course, Dr. Hobson, being from Alabama, can let us know a little bit more about the Jefferson County School District. But this is just recently where you can hit it one more time, Brennan. I'm using this school district, which was one school district, and there was some busing that was going on to have more of an integrated approach to the schooling in that district, which has now taken many steps backwards and has created a situation where this little town has seceded essentially from that school district, which is Gardendale. And you can see the drastic differences between the poverty rate and, of course, the children of color rate. And you can click it one more time. And within that school district, there's 8 now total successions within that one county, which existed before. And that's something that we prepare our teachers to understand, is to really take this ecological perspective and say, what is actually happening in my community and the history of my community, of where my children are coming from and how I can work in solidarity with them. So you could hit the next one and see a little more. So there's 71. This was even from a few years ago. So I need to actually update this as well. But this idea of community succession is happening all around the country. And you can click it one more. Of course, it's not like the city of Decatur seceded from DeKalb County anytime recently, but of course, if we look at the city of Decatur, which is like this little spot of the larger DeKalb County schools, you can hit it one more time. And you can see that then when we take a comparison between DeKalb County schools and the city of Decatur, you can take a look at that. If you could see that bar graph, I'm sorry if you can't see it, but you can see some really, really big disparities between the Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, and other populations, as well as the economically disadvantaged populations and English language learners, as well as students with disabilities within those areas. And then you could hit it one more time. And then if we hone all the way into, I have a deep partnership with Atlanta Public Schools. I used to teach for Atlanta Public Schools. I love Atlanta Public Schools, but of course it is a challenge to understand the true history of Atlanta Public Schools for any one person to be able to do. So we support each other to understand that history. And one of the things is how the district is carved up through clusters or high school clusters. So you can hit it one more time, Brennan. You can see all of the types of different schools that actually exist within one cluster of Atlanta Public Schools. You've got elementary, middle, and high school traditional schools. You've got charter schools. You've got this new thing, which is partner schools, which is a deep partnership between corporate education management organizations and the which was a traditional neighborhood school. And then we've got non-traditional schools, and then we've got these programs. And you can hit it one more time. And so then it's really difficult for our teachers to understand what are the attendance policies behind this. It becomes this whole labyrinth of how like one single cluster of schools is carved up, and it becomes quite challenging. So we like to have our teachers be able to sit back and really understand the local community. And this is, of course, as this larger historical push for school choice is also growing across our communities. So you can hit it one more time, Brennan. And one of the biggest developers is the purpose-built communities, which started here in the East Lake area. And of course, Dr. Hobson was integral in the East Lake documentary that has come out, some of the historical references there. And because we have such a deep partnership with Atlanta Public Schools, you can see how purpose-built communities is one where there was a housing and school partnership. And of course, that model has now grown. There's more than 3 of them within the city of Atlanta, and that is happening all across the greater South. So that's one other example of this partnership. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'll leave this slide up for a second if people are interested in kind of finding out a little bit more about the project, but then I'll just move to all our faces to answer some questions. And as we get started, I think maybe one of the first things I would ask, and y'all have already gone into this some, but maybe y'all have already made so many connections, and I love that y'all immediately can do that. And I think that's what always happens when you bring faculty together to discuss an issue from different disciplines, that we can immediately start making connections. We might not always do that in our classes, but I think when talking to one another, we can immediately find connections. But so after this conversation, so hearing each other speak, maybe asking this question again, like, how is Atlanta being affected by this issue of housing? And how do you see connections between some of the things that have already been said tonight? And I'll switch to stop sharing. There we go.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. And we can do this 6 ways to Sunday, but one of the ways in which we can fully understand the trend that is before us is, I think back in 2020 or 2021, I served as a chief historian for this podcast called 99% Invisible. And the podcast focused on this neighborhood on the west side of Atlanta, almost in southwest Atlanta, called Collier Heights, which was a particular enclave for Black folk in Atlanta that promoted this notion of good middle class solid living. Folks were proud of the community. Sometimes people had swimming pools in their communities and whatnot. And it was brought on by the construction mogul H.J. Russell, Herman Jerome Russell. But the thing about it is this. I am a Gen Xer, and many Gen Xers who were able to grow up in that community, many of them will tell you they can't afford to live in that community anymore. The prices of housing have been drawn up, and again, that goes back to these big events that take place, whether it be the Democratic National Convention of 1988, which was the dress rehearsal for the Olympic Games, where we see the Super Bowls that were being had in the process. We see the knocking down of the Georgia Dome, which was a fairly new stadium that could have just been rehashed. But if Atlanta was going to bid for another Super Bowl and World Cup, then it needed something slicker and all kinds of different things. And so what we're talking about here is that we are in a space to where cities are putting profits before people. Cities are putting profits and politics before people. You see all these different things, and I'll leave you all with this anecdote. And this is something we discussed last week. In his time as Classic the Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a chapter called "Of the Wings of Adelante," and in this book, he talks about how when Atlanta, Georgia, when he moves to Atlanta in 1897, Atlanta has the potential to be this particular kind of beacon for Black people coming out of the American Civil War, 30 years after the American Civil War. But then he compares Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta was named Atlanta for the Atlantica Pacifica Railroads, okay? And it's shortened to Atlanta. he compares the city of Atlanta to the Greek goddess Atalante, who would beat, who would only marry a man that could beat her in a foot race. And basically, this gentleman decides he wants to marry Atalante, and so he cheats by laying golden apples along the course of the race to distract Atalante. And at the end of at the end of this phrase, W.B. Du Bois states, "If Atlanta be not named for Atalante, it ought to have been, because it's a city that is caught up with greeting mammon and not morality." And what Du Bois is doing is he's comparing the Black community to Atalante, who can be free as long as she can stay out of the fray. As long as you can kind of keep to what you're doing, you can be free. You can have this, access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But when you get caught up, or when you become an idolater of money, when you become an idolater of profit all the time and whatnot, that this can oppress. And so a lot of what we're talking about in terms of like what our city is doing is the city is growing, but it is growing too fast. And much like, all other aspects of Atlanta as it grew, particularly due to the Olympics after 1990, it's the city lacks the infrastructure to kind of keep up with what's going on, and that presents a myriad of problems. And I think all of the scholars on this panel have done very well in articulating that.
All right, thanks, Maurice. And as we maybe hear from a couple other panelists, if anyone wants to put something into the chat, then I can ask a question, or we can try to answer that question. I think maybe we can unmute people as well. So if you are interested in asking a question, you could do that through, I think, raising your hand.
Someone
and
has
I
their
can-
hand raised.
Okay, who has it raised? Is that
Tamara has her hand
Tamara?
raised.
All right, so Tamara, I am going to unmute you. I think I am going, request unmute. There we are.
Brennan.
Hey, Tamara.
I wanted to say that I so enjoyed each and every one of your presentations, and I'm sure my students that are here did as well. I just want to share one little personal story that I think illustrates one of the housing problems. Because when I saw Taylor's map, I gasped out loud, but I was on mute then, so you didn't hear it. I went through a housing search in the middle of the pandemic. Everyone said that was very unwise, including my realtor. But one of the things that I encountered was, the first house I tried for, 10 other people also made bids on that same exact house. And my realtor told me that there's all these corporate cash buyers, private investors driving the housing prices up. And then in the home that I eventually got, the housing price had gone up 13% in 2 years in that subdivision. And I was not a first-time home buyer, so I managed, right, to wedge my way in. But if you think about that 13% and the fact that really I had to go over asking price to get it, and I was able to do that, that 13% is a killer to first-time home buyers. And that was just in that particular neighborhood. It was much worse in other neighborhoods. And actually, as Maurice was saying, had to switch neighborhoods because where I originally wanted to stay, I couldn't stay because I had been priced out in the number of years I'd lived there in a condo, and I couldn't get into the single housing market there. So there's so many hurdles, that come up. But if you think about that 13%, new first-time home buyers have to have 20% down, right? So if the house that they were trying to get is suddenly 13% higher, there's no way that they can come up with 20% in order to get their foot in. And when I saw the blue dot of all the corporate people, and there's all these private investors as well, who are buying up all the houses in that frenzy, I just thought, gosh, it's completely understandable why people can't get their toe in the door. So I just wanted to share that little point.
Yeah, I think that map and is pretty striking and terrifying, and just that knowledge that we started with from Taylor. So Taylor, do you want to speak to that at all, to talk about how that single family housing, kind of the huge spike in ownership of corporations?
Sure. And actually, if you want to, now might be a good time, Brennan, if you want to reshare the screen, or I can share mine to show those other couple of maps really quick.
If you can share yours, why don't you go ahead? So I know
Sure.
sometimes it's a little tricky when I'm trying to
Mm.
follow y'all's lead.
I just need to
If it'll
do,
let you.
yeah, I just need to do that so that, okay. So yeah, the story that you're describing there is exactly part of what's been going on with these companies over the course of the last decade, and the part of the story I didn't really even touch on since I was focusing a little bit more on renters and not even on the effects of the people who are then ultimately displaced by the growth of these um, corporate single family landlords, which are often either the former homeowners or potential first time home buyers who might get priced out. And one of the deep kind of terrifying ironies is that often um, the previous homeowners prior to these corporations are people who were foreclosed on um, in the wake of the Great Recession and so on about 15 years ago. And then a lot of those people end up renting the very same home now from a large corporate landlord in order to stay there, but no longer, they have none of the equity that previously came with it. They're now subject to the whims of a kind of faceless corporation. But one of the really important things about them is, so I showed you this map, which is just kind of the raw kind of concentration of properties, but a really important part of the story is how these firms are buying almost the entirety, in some cases, of the available stock within certain neighborhoods, and therefore have essentially become the controlling force within certain neighborhoods, able to essentially set the prices at which homes are sold. Sometimes they can do that um, by selling houses back and forth between themselves, between different entities for inflated values, and then definitely setting rents. Once you own a certain controlling share of the market in a particular neighborhood, anybody that wants to live there, right, is more or less going to be confronted with having to rent through you. They might have a choice of several different properties, but if the same person owns all of them, right, that ends up becoming a really significant issue, and the kind of thing that often in at least the last century plus of American history has been regulated as a monopoly. But one of the few things, one of the few carve outs for monopolies and the antitrust acts of the early 20th century is housing. Housing is not technically legally allowed to be considered a monopoly in the United States, though there's some shifts towards reconsidering that now. But you can see from this map that actually in a number of places where you see this darkest red, right? These are places where, that these 10 largest firms own over half of the single family rental housing in those small areas. So these hexagons are a bit smaller than what you would normally see in a census tract, kind of, so it much more approximates a really small kind of micro neighborhood, essentially the scale of maybe a subdivision or so. And you can see that there are a whole lot of places where they own well over half of the single family rental stock. And even in the places where it's more like 25%, that's still enough to often be able to have a really significant impact on prices and standards of living and things like that. But then one of the other interesting pieces, and this I think especially speaks to what Maurice was talking about in terms of the racialized history of discrimination and how race really underpins essentially how all of this works out, is that we tend to treat all of these big corporate landlords as if they're all the same thing, but really they're ultimately a lot of there's a lot of variation between them. And one of the really simple ways we can divide that is the structure of the firm, of who owns it. And so on the one hand, we have a lot of firms that are publicly traded real estate investment trusts. They're companies that you can go buy shares in on the stock market and things like that. And then there's a bunch of companies that are controlled entirely by private firms that you can't buy into unless you're an extremely wealthy investor, or sometimes we're bought into them because of our 401ks or pension funds and things like that. But there's a really stark spatial difference here in Atlanta between the types of places that those two different types of firms invest in. And this maps, if any of you know the kind of racial geography of the Atlanta metro, the difference between these two types of corporate landlords map really closely onto the racial geography of the city, with these private equity controlled firms buying more in the southern portions of the metro, especially South DeKalb, South Fulton, and Clayton counties, whereas the publicly traded companies, which tend to be much larger and get more of the attention, tend to actually be concentrated in somewhat more wealthy. They're not, I wouldn't call them entirely affluent, but maybe middle, upper middle class suburbs, and ones that are not often and always majority white, but at the very least considerably whiter, and generally just more racially diverse. So places like the northern parts of Cobb County or throughout Gwinnett County, really. But that points again to the question of the where, gives us some clues as to what these firms are doing, who they're targeting, and with what kinds of impacts, since we can see that these private firms that have the least level of scrutiny legally, and then also the least amount of recourse possible for the public, are the places that are most directly targeting lower income and predominantly Black neighborhoods here in Atlanta, but generally true across the country as well. And so there's some interesting variation there, right, of who's most affected by what kind of corporate landlord and stuff, even if everybody's all maybe facing a similar question. But then we have this entire section of the most affluent white homeowner centric kind of areas of Metro Atlanta that are barely being touched by this issue at all, right? But anywhere else, you're very likely to be confronting them. So
well, and so Jacob, can you speak to a minute? I know that certainly as people have been growing, priced out of Atlanta, and whether it's apartments, whether it's single family homes, whatever it is, and are moving out to the suburbs because traditionally that has been cheaper housing, and you have this phenomena where that's getting priced out. Like, what happens to school systems, both? So what happens to students as they're priced out? What happens to teachers? What happens to school systems as this happens, and particularly when it's happening very rapidly?
Yeah. So to Taylor's point, we have some of our student teachers who have worked with the Gwinnett County system, and in Gwinnett there is definitely a lot of transition that's happening, and a lot of our students come from there as well. And so what we try and do when we support them in their ecological equity audit is what we call it, as they analyze the neighborhoods and the communities in which the schools are serving. What they really need to do is go to what Taylor's talking about, to the micro level, and do a comparison across schools that are in the general vicinity. And it's only when they do that comparison outside of the school, so they do an internal analysis of how the school is constructed as far as gifted and talented and special education racial makeups, as well as gender makeups. And so they get an understanding of how the school is constructed within its walls. But then they do that same level of analysis with a couple other schools that are in the, sometimes just a couple miles away, not even a couple miles away. And when they take those exact same numbers and they look at the demographics and they really start to analyze it, it becomes quite starkly different, to the point where one street can be a major division line compared to the other one. And especially when it's multiple elementary schools that could be starkly different, and then they feed into one middle school. So then that's why I often ask our middle school teachers to look at the elementary schools that may feed into it. And that's when they start to get a much more drastic picture of the racial divisions that are happening within what is one school district, which is Gwinnett County School District. And I don't want to, cast dispersions to just Gwinnett County, this is a larger phenomenon that's happening all over the place. And the schools are absolutely the most segregated we've been actually since 1954 Brown decision is right now. And when we tell teachers that for the first time, it's almost like they've had these feelings, but then when they see the data, we get the maps from Taylor, we get the stories from Maurice and Melody. It really starts to take on a different an understanding in them.
Well, and I'm also curious, like like we talk about Decatur, or we talk about certain neighborhoods in Atlanta, and I'm sure in the suburbs as well, as a good school system. Like we've talked about the possibility of that a breakaway, and then that becomes something. But like, what is the effect in terms of like real estate, how the school
Well,
system
Dr.
drives
Hobson,
real estate as opposed to just the real estate driving the school?
actually, all of you, I'd be interested to know. Of course, there seems to be a little contingent within the Buckhead area of breaking away from Atlanta Public Schools and kind of creating their own city. And so perhaps y'all can speak a little bit more to that, but that would be an instance, right, where they were of this like succession that we just showed within Alabama, or the cityhood movement. You know, there's other citihoods that have happened in the South area as well. But Eagles Landing, I believe, is one of them, and y'all can kind of maybe take up the Buckhead issue if you want.
Well, listen, so let me just to give you kind of a personal point of view in some particular ways. I mean, the research that I've done, people are like, oh, you know, he's a man of the people and all this kind of stuff, and I am. But like when I bought my home, I specifically bought it in particular areas to where I bought off the MARTA line because I wanted to be in a place to where when I go home, I can actually go home. Like I just need to be able to kind of be where I'm living and whatnot. And people get all upset about that, but you know, homes are investment. But one of the things that we see when the economic downturn takes place in 2007, 2008, you see the bottom fall out in places like Clayton County, and you see the bottom fall out in aspects of DeKalb County. I actually live in South DeKalb, but I live in the part of South DeKalb that is not the area that we're talking about. So when Eastlake Meadows was shut down due to the Olympification of Atlanta, Eastlake Meadows, that area on Glenwood, was considered to be Little Vietnam. It's the most violent area in the Atlanta metro area, one of the most violent in the United States, as well as the home of a gang called Down by Law. A lot of those people were moved out to Stone Mountain, okay? And so that's a part of that Olympification. And then folks were moved into Clayton County. And so as someone who identifies as Black, one of the things you know in Atlanta is that, like, if you move to Atlanta, like, you want to stay away from Clayton County, because when Hurricane Katrina took place, that's where all of the folks who were from Louisiana and the Gulf Coast, that's where they put them. And that's where they put all low income, no income people. But this is where I'm going with this. When the economic downturn took place and the bottom fell out, you know, Clayton County, you see this connection between housing, property, and school systems. And of course, those who were troubled were DeKalb County and Clayton County. These are these Black areas. But I'm gonna give you the flip side of that too. See, there's an assumption that low income, no income people don't vote. Okay. And let me be clear on what I'm about to say. The areas that were when people were Olympified and moved to Clayton and DeKalb County, those were the areas that saved democracy in this country in 2020 and 2021. No one wants to understand this like this, but I'm going to give you this kind of anecdote. It's Clayton County that delivers Georgia for the current president that we have. Okay? Whether you agree with Democrats, Republicans, or whatnot, democracy was under attack in 2020. And then the subsequent 2021 Senate election that delivers for Raphael Warnock, that was DeKalb County. And I remember this. When all of the totals came in on January 5th, now think about what I'm saying, January 5th, 2021, and then what happens with January 6th. When all those totals were coming in and they said that it was left up to DeKalb County, like, I live in the Black part of DeKalb County. Black people were out in the front yard slapping dab like, yeah, we got this one. And people were like, well, why are you so confident? We were like, because DeKalb County is Black and it votes heavily. Like they go to the polls every time. And so what I'm saying is it's those same people who were pushed out of Atlanta, the cradle of the civil rights movement, the home of Dr. King, it's those same people who delivered democracy. And so we see this direct correlation because they had seen somewhat 30 years of mistreatment in particular ways, and they knew that if they wanted to change things for themselves, that they had to get out and vote, not only the presidential and senatorial elections, but they have to vote for state elections, they have to vote for county elections, city elections, they got to put folks on school boards and do all kinds of different things.
Thanks, Maurice. And if anyone has a question, once again, put it up. Oh, I see something just came in. Let's see. Tamara had a question for Melody. So, Tamara, I'm going to unmute you or invite you to unmute, I think is the process.
Hi, it wasn't so much a question as it just reminded me when Melody gave her talk, and maybe she can speak to this a little bit of that story about the Americans who were on vacation in the Caribbean and were poisoned by Terminex. I don't know if you all remember this in like 2016, I think it was, or 2015, and the whole family is permanently disabled now. Because they were using when Melody gave her talk, it just reminded me of this. They were using chemicals that had been banned for residential use in a rental property where these folks went on vacation and were essentially a couple and their two children were permanently disabled, completely disabled by the chemicals. And Terminex lost a very big court case for that. I was just looking it up while you guys were talking. But it just reminded me of how, as Melody said, little power tenants have, how little transparency there is about what chemicals are used, and how, the only solution is the work that she's already really been doing in the area of tenants' rights. And I just wanted to share that thought.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know about that specific incident. I'm gonna look it up. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So
If
thank
you
you.
Google Americans poisoned on vacation in the Caribbean, it'll pop up.
Okay.
Just
how I
as
did it just
an
now.
additional connection, I think to maybe make with our other wicked problems compatriots that we're not interacting with directly on the climate change side is some of the work that Melody's doing around indoor air quality. One of the key challenges that's come up a lot recently in the news is around the necessity of electrifying home appliances, not just for the purposes of decarbonizing our energy system and being able to shift away from natural gas ultimately, but that our gas powered stoves and other appliances are also causing health problems for folks and especially for kids. And so there's a kind of dual challenge there with things like indoor air quality and the conditions that we're either creating for ourselves, for those of us that might be homeowners, or that you're subjected to if you're a renter and have very little control over. But intersects with some of those big challenges around climate change as well, and who is left behind by some of those ongoing changes. So there's some interesting stuff going on out there right now at the intersection of those couple of things.
Yeah, and I think what concerns me is it feels like we are sort of as a whole community, we're starting to create a renter class, but without the sort of policy infrastructure, I guess, to support and maintain that type of housing stock. So, yeah.
And I know Amy Spring in sociology, who's on the climate change side, like one of her big focuses is the kind of greening of gentrification. That unfortunately, if you clean up that apartment, or if you clean up environmentally this neighborhood or whatever, that is likely to then make the people who are poor who are in that neighborhood have to leave that neighborhood because they can no longer live there anymore. And so even as we talk about solutions to problems with housing, with climate change, whatever, it just it just keeps twisting. I remember hearing, I don't know, a story on NPR or something 5 years ago about an older resident. They were talking about cleaning up Proctor Creek, and they were interviewing this older woman. She was like, I hope they don't clean it up because I'm not going to be able to live here anymore. And like to think about how we live in a society that is the situation, that you have an older person arguing against the cleanup of a toxic creek in their neighborhood because the person knows that she's likely to be forced out, as well as many of her neighbors forced out, because suddenly it's a more appealing place. They have little control over kind of their situation as renters, and suddenly they're going to be pushed out because the area has suddenly become a safe place to live.
Yep.
One quick connection that I would add on to that is we help support our developing teachers to look and understand the life of Freddie Gray in Baltimore, who was killed by Baltimore police because of the connection to education and schools and schooling and his experience in schools, because he was identified as special education, but had some elevated levels of lead in his blood that may have come from the housing situation that he was in, which was, neglected, derelicted, and to understand that whole connection, because of course elevated levels of blood impact your executive functioning skills and some decision-making skills for as young people. And rather than understanding where that may have come from, a label, and a determination to go into special ed is sort of a route to take, and then whether or not all of the appropriate services were provided to them. But it's just another case of study where we try and see that intersection for our developing teachers. Yeah.
Well, so I know we're way over time, so I want to let everyone
okay.
go get dinner or whatever they need to do. But I do really love talking with y'all, hearing the conversation, wanting to figure out how we can do more of this, both in our classes and at our university and out in the community. So if y'all have ideas, let's talk further about that. We've got a few more of these events, and hopefully figure out how to draw people in, hopefully not have the same problems with the WebEx. But thank y'all. Y'all are amazing. It's great to have y'all together talking to y'all. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all very much. Thank you for sharing your time.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for everybody for coming that's in the audience. We appreciate you.
Certainly do. Thank you all. Y'all have a great evening.
You fighting the good fights, y'all.
Okay.
Good night.